Behind the billions.
Imagine a country that has recently been completely devastated by a brutal war. It is the 1970s, and South Korea is heavily reliant on basic, low-paying industries. They are making cheap textiles, refining sugar, and manufacturing wigs. At this time, Samsung is a successful domestic company. But their business model is entirely traditional. They are making their money by selling cheap black and white televisions, trading commodities, and running local department stores. In the eyes of the global market, Samsung is just a low-tier manufacturer, utilizing cheap labor in a developing nation. But deep inside the company, a massive, explosive conflict is quietly brewing. It is a psychological war between a deeply conservative board of directors who want to protect their current profits, and a young, rebellious visionary who wants to gamble the entire future of the empire on something nobody in the country truly understands. That young man was Kun-hee, the third son of Samsung's founder. Kun-hee had spent time studying in Japan and the United States, while the executives in Seoul were busy, celebrating their sales figures for household appliances. The young Lee was watching the birth of Silicon Valley. He saw the rapid rise of Intel and the absolute dominance of Japanese electronics giants like Toshiba and NEC. He realized a terrifying truth. If Samsung did not learn how to build the microscopic brains of these machines, the semiconductors, they would forever remain a second-class company, permanently enslaved to foreign technology. He knew that the future of global supremacy was not in heavy machinery or textiles, but hidden inside tiny, invisible wafers of silicon. In 1974, a defining moment arrived. A small, struggling joint venture called Korea Semiconductor was on the verge of total bankruptcy. Kun-hee saw this as the ultimate golden ticket. He desperately rushed to the Samsung board of directors and pleaded with them to acquire the bankrupt company. He argued that this was the perfect stepping stone to enter the high-tech industry. The reaction from the board of directors was absolute, unanimous horror. The top executives looked at the young heir like he had completely lost his mind. They presented what they called the three insurmountable walls. First, they had absolutely no capital. Semiconductor fabrication plants cost hundreds of millions of dollars, a scale of investment that could instantly bankrupt the entire Samsung group if it failed. Second, they had zero technology. They were a company that struggled to make decent color televisions, and now the young son wanted to manufacture the most complex microscopic engineering on the planet. Third, they had no market. Even if a miracle happened and they managed to make a chip, the global market was already brutally monopolized by American and Japanese titans. Who in their right mind would buy a high-tech microchip from a Korean sugar and textile company? The board firmly and aggressively rejected his proposal. They concluded that entering the semiconductor business was corporate suicide. Under normal circumstances, this is where the story should end. The rational, data-driven executives had spoken, and the young heir had been shut down. But this is where the terrifying dogmatism of Kun-hee was unleashed. When the company officially refused to give him the money, he did the unthinkable. He emptied his own personal bank accounts. He took his own private wealth and single-handedly bought a 50% stake in the bankrupt semiconductor company himself. It was a massive, insane gamble. He was forcing the company's hand, tying his own financial survival to a technology that his own executives believed was a death trap. For the next several years, it looked like the board of directors was completely right. The semiconductor division bled money endlessly. It was a black hole for cash. The executives quietly mocked the project, viewing it as the expensive, foolish hobby of a spoiled rich son. But there was one man silently watching this entire brutal struggle. Lee Byung-chul, the legendary founder of Samsung and the father of Kun-hee. For years, the father remained highly skeptical. He listened to the logical warnings of his brilliant executives, but he also saw the unyielding, fanatical obsession in his son's eyes. The climax of this monumental corporate drama arrived in the freezing winter of 1983. Lee Byung-chul traveled to Tokyo, Japan. He locked himself in a hotel room, completely isolating himself from the conservative voices of his sole executive. He looked at the shifting global economy, the oil shocks that were crippling heavy industries, and the undeniable rise of the personal computer. He realized his son had been absolutely right all along. On February 8th, 1983, he picked up the telephone and called his headquarters in Seoul. He delivered what is now legendary in business history as the Tokyo Declaration. He officially commanded that the entire Samsung conglomerate would pivot and aggressively enter the very large-scale integration semiconductor business. The fallout was spectacular. The Samsung boardroom was thrown into a state of absolute panic. The executives thought the old man had finally gone crazy alongside his son. The international response was even worse. Executives at Intel in America reportedly laughed out loud. The Japanese tech giants published articles mocking the announcement. They believed it was a mathematical impossibility for a developing nation to catch up to their decades of precise engineering. But the dogmatic decision had been made, and now it was time for ruthless execution. Lee Kun-hee and his father commanded the construction of a massive fabrication plant in Gihung. In the semiconductor industry, building a factory usually took at least 18 to 24 months. Samsung did it in 6. They achieved this by working in brutal, around-the-clock shifts, with engineers marching through the freezing winter mud like soldiers at war. They slept on the factory floors. They studied foreign technical manuals until the pages physically fell apart. By late 1983, they achieved the impossible. They successfully developed the 64K DRAM chip, shocking the entire global tech industry. However, the war had just begun. The Japanese giants realized this Korean upstart was a legitimate threat, and they launched a ruthless counterattack. They initiated a massive, bloody price war, often called the chicken game of the 1980s. The Japanese companies intentionally dropped the price of a memory chip from $4 down to a devastating 30 cents. They were willing to lose billions of dollars just to suffocate Samsung and force them into bankruptcy. Samsung was bleeding cash at an unprecedented, catastrophic rate. The semiconductor division accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars in massive deficits. The executives screamed for a retreat. The financial analysts begged them to shut down the factories before the entire Samsung empire collapsed. But the dogmatism of the Lee family reached its peak. Instead of surrendering, they doubled down. While losing massive amounts of money, Lee Kun-hee ordered the construction of an even bigger, even more expensive third-generation factory. It was a move of pure, unadulterated madness. He believed that whoever survived this bloody price war would eventually inherit the entire world. He was right. By the late 1980s, the personal computer boom exploded across the globe. Demand for memory chips skyrocketed. The Japanese companies, exhausted by the price war and slow to adapt, began to stumble. Samsung, having built massive new factories during the darkest days of the crisis, was perfectly positioned to capture the exploding market. By 1992, Samsung officially overtook the Japanese giants to become the undisputed #1 manufacturer of memory chips in the entire world, a title they have fiercely defended for decades. The story of Samsung's semiconductor empire is a chilling reminder of the true nature of visionary leadership. If the young Lee Kun-hee had listened to the rational advice of his highly educated board of directors, Samsung would probably still be a regional company, selling washing machines and basic electronics. The executives were perfectly logical, mathematically correct, and completely wrong about the future. It took the fanatical dogmatism of a son, risking his own money, and the ultimate, terrifying gamble of a father, ignoring his entire board of directors, to build the foundation of a technological superpower. It proves that in the highest levels of global business, true greatness is never achieved by consensus. It is achieved by those willing to walk alone into the dark, ignoring the laughter of the world, until they emerge, holding the future in their hands.
Tap to subscribe. Watch more untold stories next.